It's the boy Blackbeard. I'm back. What's happening? Mr. Mirage. Y'all know what time it is. The Magi. So what we're going to do in this tape is we're going to continue the Aboriginal American history series. I see that the brothers and sisters out there like this information. And a lot of y'all are taking it and running with it and doing your homework. So that's a good thing. So salute and shout out to y'all for that. And also just salute and shout out to all the new subscribers to the Midnight Mirage, people that's been rocking with this thing. Much love to you all. Much love. So what we're going to do in this tape is I'm going to talk a little bit about religion and culture. And we're going to tie that to the Indigenous Americans, which is us. Clearly, we know that by now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the ancient cultures were that we were dealing with prior to the Inquisition and prior to the dumb diverters and all these other, exodus and expulsions and all the other things that our people went through. But in other words, what were some of the cultures going on here prior to these situations? Because this helps in, where you get your nationality and your birthright and you start trying to formulate yourself. All this stuff is going to play into that, because it's not like we can really create something new and be a new people. This whole Negro and Black identity is a foreign identity that was placed on us. And it is a foreign culture that was placed on us. But, in all actuality, we did have a real culture that we came from. So it's not like we can create a new name for ourselves. We can update our culture. But nevertheless, we do have a culture that we came from. So if we want to know what those cultures were and what they are, we would have to look into the archaeology and basically what was found here in the Americas. When they found certain tablets, certain, let's say, stone buildings or stone or big mounds or pyramid complexes. What were the type of languages that they find, etc. And as I've said in the previous tape, the language that you see show up the most is what is known as Paleo-Hebrew. Now you have a modern form of Hebrew and you have an ancient form of Hebrew, which is Paleo-Hebrew. Now in the so-called Middle East, or in what you all know of as East Africa, some of the things they dig up over there, they find a lot of modern Hebrew and they may find a few Paleo-Hebrew scattered about. But when you dig up the ancient Hebrew artifacts found here in the Americas, most of them are in Paleo-Hebrew. Okay, so Paleo-Hebrew is the mother of the Hebrew languages. Okay, this is an ancient archaic form of Hebrew. All right, and that is one of the languages that they found here in the Americas. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read into some books to back up what I'm saying to you, because when we talk about these Aboriginal Hebrews and a lot of this stuff, and we talk about these Aboriginal Indians or so-called Native Americans or these so-called Indians or Indios, nevertheless, the primary culture of these people, for what I'm seeing, is Paleo-Hebrew. So what I'm getting at is that ancient America was primarily an ancient Hebrew land. Did you have other cultures here? Of course you did. But even some of these other cultures are the children cultures or the son and daughter cultures of this ancient Hebrew culture. So when we talk about even the Egyptians and even some of these later day people, what I'm really seeing is that a lot of these people are coming out of the ancient, archaic, autochthonous Hebrew culture. As I read in the other book, when they talked about the people of Mount Meru, the ancient gods of the Vedic system, these ancient autochthonous Ethiopians, these are these same, Paleo-Hebrew speaking indigenous people that I'm talking about. And some of these people even go back much further back than even Atlantis. Atlantis is one of these civilizations that I deal with because, some people can't really think back too much further than that. But there is civilizations older than that. You have Lemuria, you have Mu, you have Atlantis, of course, you have so-called Hyperborea. But, honestly, there may have been even more than that we don't even know about, because the original, manifestation was the triple stage darkness out of the etheric world. And that's what we read about in the Old Testament with the Elohim. But nevertheless, we just going to talk about religion and culture and, just show that, whatever this Hebrew thing is, or whatever this ancient Judaism is, it has some kind of real close tie to us, And by the end of this tape, you will see how that ties into your identity if you are calling yourself an Indian or a so-called American Aboriginal. Okay. So before I go into the reading, what I want to think about, want you to think about is that when you hear the word religion, the word culture should be also in the back of your mind. Because in the modern world, what we call a religion, these really were just the cultures of the ancient indigenous people. Let me repeat that. In the modern world, what we call religions, these really are just the indigenous cultures of the old Aboriginal people. So what we call Judaism, what we call, let's say, Islam, these really are just certain cultures that our, ancestors had in the past. And in the modern world, we call them religion. So when I think of religion and I think of culture, people in a religion, they worship a certain way. They may have certain traditions within this religion. They may dress a certain way. Some religions are geographical and some are not. But either way it goes, the religion is somewhat communal. It's people who share certain ideals and even certain physical things. Some of the people in the religion may even be from the same ethnicity, okay, predominantly, all right? When you think of culture, it somewhat overlaps. You think of people who talk a certain language or speak a certain way in the culture. You think of people who do things a certain way within the culture. And you think of people who may even worship or have a certain kind of spirituality within the culture. And then a culture usually is also tied to a people of a certain ethnicity or nation even. Now you have people who can amalgamate or do what's called be a culture vulture, but nevertheless, they are taking the culture of someone else. So let me give you an example before I go deeper into the reading. When you see these Caucasian, Ashkenazi, Germanic tribe Jews of today, these are people who have amalgamated or have adopted the culture of indigenous Hebrews. Okay, so they have literally taken the identity and the culture of a people. Okay, so that's what I mean. Like when you have somebody convert into your religion, this is like having somebody give up their culture and convert into your form of culture. Okay, that's why when you look at a lot of these old wars, especially with the Catholic Church and the Inquisition, they had a lot of the ancient Hebrews that were in America, of course, and then the ones that were in Southern Europe. They had them converting into what's called Marranos, where in the daytime or in the public, they would be worshiping like Christians. But behind closed doors, they really were doing Hebrew, ancient Judaic practices. And they were just forced to do this because of the Inquisition. So you had that going on. And then when they came to America, you already know about the story of Toby and them trying to whip you and beat your Aboriginal name out of you and stuff like that. So this is them trying to basically get you to adopt their culture. So religion and culture are the same. And the same way you convert into a new religion is the same way you would also convert into a whole new culture. So when we talk about Negro or African American or black, what we really are saying is that this is our culture and this is our religion. Keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is two books I'm going to read. The first one is called Israelites and Indians. Okay. Before I go deeper, it's a brother out there named King Drop. This brother go in. He put out some real good information. He leaves some good links behind so you can check out some stuff and do your own homework. So major salute to this brother named King Drop. I checked him out before and he, mentioned some books and, I went and did my homework. So major salute to him. My brother named King Drop. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to read into this shit. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to keep this shit going forward. This is in a book called Israelites and Indians. Many authors have contended that the North American Indians were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So note, they didn't say 12, they say 10. Prominent among them was James Adair, whose work highly useful with regard to the customs of the southeastern Indians, among whom he spent many years, was mainly devoted to proof of the proposition. The Reverend Ethan Smith is also conspicuous. Even the latest general treatise on the Indians, published last year and bearing the comprehensive title The American Indian, favors the same theory. The authors of the school mentioned rest their case on the fact, which I freely admit with greater emphasis, that an astounding number of customs of North American Indians are the same as those recorded of the ancient Israelites. So once again, customs, cultures, religions. The lesson to be derived from this parallel is, however, very different from that drawn by those who have advocated the descent in question. The argument strongly urged derived from an alleged similarity between Hebrew and some Indian languages, especially in identity of certain vocabulary words, may be dismissed forthwith. Perhaps the most absurd of all the coincidences insisted upon Adair was the religious use of the sounds represented by him to be the same as the word Jehovah. The lost Israelites, when deported, did not use orally the name given in the English version as Jehovah, and the mode of its spelling and pronunciation is at this moment in dispute, though generally accepted as Yahweh. Therefore, it would be most extraordinary if the tribes of Indians, supposed to be the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, should at this time know how to pronounce a name which their alleged ancestors practically did not possess. So what this is saying right here is that the ancient Israelites, or the ancestors of the so-called Native Americans, they had a more ancient form of Hebrew, okay? Even right now, just using this example of the English version of this name Jehovah, or Yahweh, or Yahweh, and how they are saying that this is actually maybe a corruption of the Paleo-Hebrew, or the ancient way that our ancestors pronounced it. So when people talk about Jehovah or Yahweh, or, it's kind of funny, a lot of those names you see, a lot of those Hebrew Israelites screaming, to keep it all the way 100, a lot of us are not really digging into the Paleo ancient Hebrew. So that is actually what we need to look into if we want to know how to say some of this stuff. So, a lot of the brothers out there with these different Hebrew Israelite camps need to stop all that arguing about, if his name was Yeshua this, or, I just see a lot of them arguing with that. You got to get out of that now. You just got to get out of that. A lot of us, we don't, most of us don't know. You know what I'm saying? They stripped the tongue away. Okay. That was the whole point of this shit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to a book called Lost Tribes, Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. It's called The Lost Tribes, Promised Lands, And what I'm going to do with this is, like I said, we're looking at the culture, and we're looking at the so-called customs and religion of these ancient Americans, or these so-called Hebrews or Israelites. Okay. But before I go into that, I'm going to go back to the book Israelites and Indians, because there's one more thing I want to read. But all arguments that the Indians are descended from the lost tribes are demolished by the fact, now generally accepted, that those tribes were not lost, but that most of their members were deported and absorbed, their traces remaining during centuries, and that others fled to Jerusalem and Egypt. If any large number of them had remained in a body, and had migrated at the time before the Columbian discovery, but later than the capture of Sumeria in the 7th century BC, their journey from Mesopotamia to North America would have required the assistance of miracles that have not been suggested except in the Book of Mormons. So what this is saying is right here is that the ancient Hebrews, we've been moving around for quite a while. Okay. We haven't always been just in America. There were times where we were in the lands of what you call India. There were times when we were in the lands of what you call Africa. There were times when we were in the lands of what you call Europa. There were times when we were in the lands of what you call the so-called Middle East. You got to remember, we've been here since the beginning of time. Okay. So don't look at just the history that you see, really, even in the Old Testament. We go back even further than that. All right. So it goes on to say that, that there were ancient Hebrews who traveled to North America from Mesopotamia. Okay. For brevity, the term Indians may have been used, leaving the blunder of Columbus where it belongs, without iterating their designation as North American, though I shall not treat of the Aboriginal inhabitants south of the United States. So once again, like how you hear that word Indian when it really is just an Aboriginal American. Then it goes on to say that this neglect of Mexico and Central and South America is not only to observe my own limits, but because some of the peoples of those regions had reached a culture stage in advance of the northern tribes. To avoid confusion, the term Israelites may designate all the nation, although the tribes became divided into the kingdoms of Israel and of Judah. When it is necessary to speak of the northern tribe, they may be designated as the kingdom of Sumeria. Wow. So they're saying right here that you had the southern tribe of Israel and you had the northern tribe of Israel. And it's saying right here that also that that Mexico, Central, and South America is part of the kingdom, or the empire of Israel, rather. And it goes on also to say that some of the northern regions had reached a more cultural advanced stages. So it's probably why you see a lot of pyramids and stuff like that in Central America and stuff. And although in North America you have them here, but they're more so in the mounds and stuff like that. Whereas in the Yucatan you see full blown up pyramids. And then it goes on to say too that you had the kingdom. It says that the northern tribes may have been designated as the kingdom of Sumeria. Now, ain't that something? So they saying that the northern tribe is the kingdom of Sumeria. And that makes a whole lot of sense too, because where did Abraham's father come from? Abraham's father was named Terah, I want to say. Abraham's father was named Terah, which sounds a lot like Torah, doesn't it? Which is the law. But anyway, what lands did his father come from? Okay. And then think about, like I said, they call us Saracens. Who was Abraham's primary wife? Sarah. You remember how Abraham and Sarah had their names changed? Abraham's father came from the lands of what? Abraham and Sarah had what offspring that led into Jacob and who? Israel. Is it starting to make sense? Then it goes on to say the shortest term, Jews, would be incorrect, as the people now scattered over the world are called Jews, are chiefly the descendants of the southern branch or fractional part of the children of Israel, and have a special history beyond that common to them and their congeners. All right. So even that term Jew, you got to remember you had the tribe of Judah. You got to remember it was 12 tribes, but in the more ancient terms, it was even 10. So that means that maybe after we were scattered about in the ancient worlds, when it was only maybe 9 or 10 tribes, you know, people start multiplying and stuff like that. So then this is probably how it ended up being 12 tribes. So maybe we even all met back up as a whole people, even, you know. But anyway, let me go into this other book. So what I'm going to do right now is talk about a little bit about, you know, this guy named, in English translation, we know him as Christopher Columbus, which really his name is Cristobal, which has a lot to do even with the term cannibal. There is an association and a similarity in the name Cristobal Colon and the word cannibal. Okay. And even the word cannibal was a term that they tried to apply to the indigenous people of the Carib, or what we know of as the Caribbean. Okay. So those Spaniards and those Portuguese used that derogatory term that they created called cannibal, which we know of as cannibal. And they try to say that the indigenous aboriginals of the Caribbean, which they say were these dark-skinned people like Ethiopians, but they say that they were a savage people. But nevertheless, you know, that's just how they name us with stuff. So they probably just with some indigenous ancestors who didn't tolerate no shit from them and didn't want to hang out with them. Okay, so they called them cannibals. But either way it goes, I'm about to read to you all a part when, because a lot of people say that, oh, well, you know, the Moors helped Christopher Columbus, the Moors, right? Well, what you got to remember is that, like we already said, you know, the indigenous people of the planet, we already knew the navigation routes and we already knew how to, you know, travel around. So yes, they did get some maps from us, and yes, they did get some, you know, help from us. They probably even got some boats from us. But what you don't remember is that when you're talking about these aboriginals or these Asiatics or these Moors, in particular of Southern Europa and North Africa, Not all of these Aboriginals chose to go with what the Catholic Church wanted to do. So some of them chose to keep fighting and die. Some of them chose to hide and go underground, or some of them chose to maybe transport somewhere else and migrate somewhere else and escape somewhere else when the Catholic Church took over rather. And then you had those who stayed around and were forced to convert into so-called Catholicism or Christianity. Now, in the historical books, these people are known as something like Marranos. You will see that term. But long story short, you had Hebrews, okay, in the times of Europa, who were forced to convert into Catholicism. And a lot of these were Moors. They were Aboriginal copper-colored people. So when they talk about these Moors that sold them out, a lot of these were Marranos, or people who were forced to convert. And then they needed these same Aboriginals because these Aboriginals spoke multiple languages. And they knew that the Aboriginals of America spoke certain languages, in particular Hebrew. So what you're going to see right now is I'm going to read to you an account that's going to prove and back up that the indigenous Americans are Hebrews, more in particular ancient Hebrews, not modern Hebrews, but the ancient Hebrew culture. So it talks about when Christopher Columbus was on his boat and, they were traveling the seas and a lot of his men were complaining. The high sea was most necessary for me, Columbus wrote in his journal for September 23rd, 1492. So this is September 23rd, 1492, when he's traveling. Then it goes on to say that 17 days out at sea after a month-long stopover in the Canaries. Then it goes on to say that some of his men were grumbling, etc. But now let's get to the juice. We do not know much concerning Columbus's crew of about 90 men aboard the 3 ships, but at least one of them was an Israelite whose presence as such was not merely accidental. This was Luis de Torres, a convert of possibly only that year, who had once held a position with the governor of Murcia. He was said to have known Hebrew, Aramaic, and some Arabic, and had been brought along by Columbus specifically as an interpreter. Now, before I go into the fucking Ayugit or the fucking whoopsie on Mortal Kombat, before I go into that. So here you have right here that Columbus's crew was of about 90 men on 3 ships. So imagine about 90 men. That's a lot of people, right? Then it says that one man was an Israelite. And it said that it wasn't accidental. Then it says that this Israelite had only been a converso or converted for possibly only 1 year. So he had converted the year of the trip. Okay. So that means in 1492, this Israelite had just now converted into Christianity and is being forced to be an interpreter for Columbus. So then it goes on to say that he was a governor of Murcia. So let me ask you this. So if he was a governor of Murcia, clearly he was educated because he spoke Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. And they're calling him an Israelite. These is who was in southern and central Europe. It was Hebrews. It was Israelites. They were the ones that was with the Moors. So when people say the Moors, you got to remember the Moors could have had a culture or a religion of either Islam or Judaism. Because when we say in Moors, we really just mean in copper-colored Aboriginal people, just like we may say an Ethiopian. We're just describing the ethnicity of the person. But the cultures of the people, some of the Aboriginal people were Hebrew and Judaic in that culture. And then some of the people had a more modern version of Judaism, or a more modern version or an extended version of Judaism is what we know of as Hebrew, because it's really the same stuff. I mean, known as Islam, excuse me. So because even when we say a Muslim or a Muslim, okay, we talking about people who are born in peace, in the water of peace, and people who are of faith. Okay. So the Hebrews and the Muslims, these are the same people. Okay. They just have different cultures, but their cultures root from the same root. All right. So they saying that this man, and then they saying he's a governor of Murcia. So once again, they forced this Hebrew, who they calling Luis de Torres, but that wasn't his Hebrew name. That was the fucking converted so-called Latin Christian name that they gave him. But we don't know his real Hebrew name. So when people keep saying that, oh, the Moors sold us out, it's like you talking about Like, you don't even really know what you're talking about. You talking about people, who were forced to convert into some stuff, and like, ain't no telling what kind of pressures they had these people under and what was really going on. Think about it. This is one Israelite or one Hebrew on a boat with 89 fucking amalgamated Caucasian Germanic tribe barbarians who just now, living in castles and just now living in homes, because before they was living in barns and shit like that, shoveling shit and making fucking, piling shit on their doors so they don't get cold. It's like, how you think he really was feeling? You think this was a Moor and he just was selling y'all out because he hate Aboriginal Americans, he hates people who looks like him? Do y'all really think it went down like that? Do you really think that these Israelites of Central Europe and Southern Europe would sell out their Israelite brothers and sisters of the Americas like that? So when y'all say that the Moors sold out the indigenous Americans, you also say that the Hebrews sold out the indigenous Americans. But do you think it went down like that? Because there was Hebrews in America. And how is that the case? Let's look at this shit. So as it goes on to say, this Israelite, they saying that this Hebrew Israelite, that he knew Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. So once again, you had an Israelite who was speaking Arabic. So you don't think that he was maybe doing some businesses or with people in a mosque, possibly, but he still was of Hebrew custom? Of course. And that's why I told you all in the ancient city of Jerusalem that the Hebrews, the Christians, and the Muslims, they was all getting along. Why? Because they was all Aboriginal people. They all came from the same families. They just had different customs. Okay? Had little differences in their cultures. That's it. But either way it goes, it says that he was said to have known Hebrew, Aramaic, and some Arabic, and had been brought by Columbus specifically as an interpreter. One of the purposes on the voyage, as we have seen, was to find the great Khan, and Taurus, which is this converted Christian, this Hebrew, was to be the mouthpiece for this encounter, presumably on the basis of his Hebrew. Perhaps Columbus and his supporters had decided that the great Khan reported on by Marco Polo and others might be the Israelite king who dealt across the river from Prester John. So what we have right here is that Christopher Columbus is going on this voyage to the Americas, okay? And don't think that he's going to this voyage to the Americas, let's say from Southern Europe. You got to remember, he was also making multiple voyages too. He went in 1492 and he went in 1493. Then he went like a few years later. This is how it was going. It wasn't just one trip. They would come one time, see what's going on, try to befriend the people, try to kind of get the people a little soft, and then come years later and try to go to war with the people and stuff like that. This is how it was going on. So they knew when they were going to the Americas that the Americas, they had people that are speaking Hebrew languages. How did they know? Because they had the different tales of people like Marco Polo and I guess whoever had made certain voyages and trips before them. So they had the accounts. And in the accounts of Marco Polo, it was said that there was a great Khan of the Americas. So what do you mean a great Khan? Now, I want you to think about something. This is very, very important. Think about the term Asiatic or Asia. Think about the term Khan as in Genghis Khan or Shao Khan from Mortal Kombat. Think about the great Khan that's being used here in this sentence. But it's saying here that the great Khan was in America and that they needed this interpreter to speak to the great Khan. And they said it was on the basis that the great Khan was reported on by Marco Polo and others that he might be the Hebrew or the Israelite king who dwelt across the river from Prester John. So what this is saying is that with Christopher Columbus or Cristobal Colon and these other Spaniards and Portuguese or whoever, and these converted Christians who were Moors or Hebrews that was basically probably scared for their lives, when he came over here, he already knew that the people were speaking Hebrew. This is why he needed a Hebrew interpreter, because out of all those 89 people on the boat, none of them knew Hebrew, but they knew that the indigenous language of America was Hebrew, or at least one of them was Hebrew. Because like I said, in America, they were speaking Hebrew, Arabic, okay, and the different Aramaic languages and a bunch of other languages, a bunch of ancient Paleo languages that we probably don't even know about. Paleo-Ethiopian. Like they had super languages. You know what I'm saying? They were speaking Sanskrit, ancient Sanskrit, you know, ancient cuneiform languages. They had ancient stuff that we don't even know about. So yeah, we calling these people Hebrews, but I'm not speaking in a modern context. I'm speaking in an ancient Hebrew text, or an ancient Hebrew context rather. So this is clear-cut evidence in this book called Lost Tribes, Promised Land by Ronald Sanders, that when Cristobal Colon came, he came to the Americas. He needed a Hebrew interpreter. So they had a brother by the name of Louis Torres, who was an Israelite from Southern Europe. Okay. And he had just got forced into Christianity and only had been converted for a year. They take this brother, who y'all calling the Moor, who probably did know about the traveling on the water, and he did know the languages. They took him and brought him to the Americas, and he was one of the interpreters. Okay. So, you know, that's how that went. And they needed him to speak to the Great Khan. So they're calling the Emperor of America the Great Khan. Just like Genghis Khan or like Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat. Now it makes sense why they make Shao Kahn the enemy or the bad guy on Mortal Kombat. Now it makes sense. Because the Emperor of ancient America was known as the Great Khan. And I also even have a picture of Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat, and he's melanated. So it all makes sense now. They got him as this evil person. And I used to always wonder why I was attracted to Shao Kahn's, just his destructive powers. It was always something I fucked with about Shao Kahn. And now it makes sense. So when they talk about these ancient emperors of the Incan Empire, the Aztec Empire, these are the great Khans of the old Americas. And this is who Christopher Columbus had to check in with. All right. Let me move on to something else. So now we're going to just, once again, add a little bit more to that. So there was a guy named Durin who was, just doing some work and basically, with this Indian Aboriginal Hebrew connection. So anyway, it goes on to say that Durin's work suggested that he viewed the Indian destiny from a perspective influenced by the new Christian experience of this time, whether he was conscious of this or not. For with increasing frequency and conviction, Durin came to see elements of a Judaic character in the old Aztec religion or culture. At first, this tendency appears only as a fervent search for Jewish analogies provoked by Aztec customs such as the eating of only unleavened bread on certain days of the year, the prohibition of drinking liquids after the eating of certain ritual foods, and the use of baths for purification. Okay. In time, this begins to seem to Durin like overwhelming evidence that the Indians are indeed descended from the lost tribes of Israel, and he opens his last and most important work, The History of the Indies of New Spain. So there's a guy named Durin, and he wrote a book called The History of the Indies of New Spain. All right. And it says that Durin was born in 1537 in Seville. So once again, he was somebody from Southern Europe, the old Moorish Empire from over there. I don't know what his ethnicity is, but So I'm gonna wrap it up with this. So remember how in the previous tape I talked about the Aboriginals of California and how you have a caliphate, and a lot of people know about Queen Khalifa. Well, recently they had a lot of movies come out in the last few years that were dealing with Wonder Woman. And a lot of the Wonder Woman stuff has been showing up. Basically using Wonder Woman as a symbol of feminism. The reason why they always have to have the black female in feminism, because she is the symbol of the alpha female. Okay. That's in physical nature. Birthing nature, any nature, she is the symbol of the alpha female, or what they know of as a superwoman. And that is what Wonder Woman is a symbol of, okay? That's why if you look up even the old Wonder Woman comic books, she actually was an Aboriginal, okay? Or a bronze, copper-colored skinned woman. But anyway, I'm going to read in this book to prove that point. So in this part, it's real quick. It's talking about the Turks and the Persians. You got to remember, too, that the Turks and the Persians also are Aboriginals. A heavily melanated, dark-skinned, copper-colored people. But anyway, it says, the Turks depicted as pagans who worship Jupiter and other Roman gods. Because remember now, the ancient Ethiopian version of Zeus Amun. So they're not talking about that white version of Zeus. They're talking about ancient Aboriginal versions of it. It says, the Turks depicted as pagans who worship Jupiter and other Roman gods bring together for the battle all the dark-skinned peoples whom they rule. These include the inhabitants of the island on the right hand of the Indies called California, very close to a region of the terrestrial paradise, which was populated by black women who had no men among them, for their way of life was almost like the Amazons. The women of California are great warriors who fly into battle on the backs of griffins. So they're saying right here that in California, in the ancient worlds, it was ruled and populated by black women, and that there were no men among them. And it said that they were the Amazons. So when they talk about the Amazons, when they talk about Xena, the warrior princess, when they talk about Wonder Woman, these are the Amazonian Aboriginal women of California. Then it goes on to say that these women of California were great warriors, and they fly into the battle on griffins. So now you understand why in the Black Panther, that in that movie, he had a bunch of women protecting him, didn't he? And I haven't even seen that movie yet, but I can see in a lot of the clips and stuff, it's a lot of women that are warriors in that movie, fighting people, etc. That's what I'm saying. The Black Panther movie is America. A lot of that stuff went down in America. But either way it goes, it says that these Aboriginal black women, okay, or these Amazons of California, were warriors, and they rode on the backs of on sphinxes. Or griffins, rather, excuse me. You know what a griffin is, a sphinx, a griffin. That's that word that you all see on the Boule logo. But either way it goes, though, it says that in the ancient world, that the warrior women of California were black women, and they were riding on griffins. So I guarantee a lot of the United States, when they went out there, they probably wouldn't even report on it. But it probably were certain tribes of aggressive women that they were fighting that were black women. And these were the Amazons. So the so-called black woman actually is Wonder Woman. And this is facts. I mean, this is found in the book Lost Tribes. Okay. It's found in the book Lost Tribes. So hopefully this makes some sense when we're dealing with culture. Hopefully this makes some sense. Culture and religion is one of the same. It's just a way of life. That's all it is. If you perceive, it's people looking at the same so-called God, but just in a different cultural fashion, But this is a banger. You know what I'm saying? I'm pretty sure y'all gonna grab a lot out of this, but y'all stay tuned for the next one. I'm out.